It's a big club. It's a big club. And you ain't in it. You ain't in it. You ain't in it.
All right. Good evening, everyone. This is your host, Matt Valente, and welcome to our very first episode of the Meeting in the Aisle podcast. I'm joined tonight with my good friend, Orlando.
Hello, everyone.
And our first guest, Tomàs. Evening, Tomàs.
Good evening.
Our first topic tonight is we're going to be talking about whether or not the country that we live in, the United States, was founded as a racist nation, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. Which is often these days called, what, critical race theory? Is that what is kind of what we're getting at here? Yeah. And I know that there's a lot of people on both sides of the aisle who have a lot to say about this, about whether or not America is a racist country, if we've always been a racist country, if we're no longer a racist country. And so I'm looking forward to hearing a lot about what our guest has to say. I know I've personally got my own personal opinions about this. So I guess we'll move on.
You said that is America a racist country, and you connected it with critical race theory, but I think it's fair to say the critical race theory, or America is a racist country, is part of critical race theory. And there's more to the critical race theory. I haven't studied it, but I think there's more to it than that. But maybe it's a very fundamental part of it.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I honestly don't really know what critical race theory is. It's kind of like this buzzword that's been going around in the media a lot, but I personally have not looked into it too much. I don't really know what critical race theory is. So I guess we'll stick with our show's premise tonight of, is America a racist country, and was it founded as a racist country? Here, I'll let you take the floor on it first. And hear what your opinion is. And we'll have a conversation about it.
All right, Matt and Lando, thank you very much. I've been thinking about this question, and I do a little research on the internet and kind of checking it out. And, was it founded as a racist country? Well, you take a look at the Constitution, you do a little research on the internet, and you look at the Constitution. And the U.S. Constitution doesn't talk about any race. The U.S. Constitution doesn't mention white or black. It talks about... And now the U.S. Constitution, it was... I'm fuzzy on 1787, I believe, is about the time they were trying to put this thing together. And there was an initial document, 1776, then they fought this revolution, and then there was an initial government. It failed, then they're trying to write the Constitution. And the Constitution, they're trying to deal with, they're trying to get all 13 colonies on board. And, there were people that said, hey, we want to, disallow or make or outlaw slavery. And slavery and racism are tied together. So I'm talking about slavery, but they're tied together.
Yeah, they kind of have to. At least in America, they are. Like America, when we're getting founded, pretty much all of the slaves were a different race than the people who owned them.
Well, yeah. That's generally, that's Sure. I think that's a good observation, man.
Because
So
there's been slavery in human history for a long time, but the American version of slavery was kind of interesting in that it was all one race of people. It was like you could tell at a glance which people in this country were slaves because of the color of their skin, which is kind of unique in my opinion. Like when the Romans had slaves, like they had people because the Roman Empire was huge. It like spread all throughout Europe and Africa and the Middle East, and so they would have people of all different colors. But like if you were born like a white Roman, like you could still end up being a slave in Rome, but you were much less likely to end up a slave as a white person in the United States, for sure.
well, yeah, that's an interesting observation.
And then kind of going back to what you said though, that system existed before the country was founded though.
Oh yeah.
So it's almost like when they founded the country, that was already a problem to kind of suss out.
Yes, absolutely. And when I into this a little bit, see something that folks, I mean, here we're talking about the United States and America, racism, slavery. Well, the Brits, they outlawed slavery in 1833 ahead of the United States, ahead of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
The Brits and were the biggest profiters of the slave trade from the 1600s to when it was the slave trade was outlawed in England in 1807, and strange, coincidentally, same year in 1808 it was outlawed in the United States. That was one of the provisions of the Constitution, a concession given to the southern states that the slave trade wouldn't be stopped until after 1807. February 1st, 1808, and I don't remember which president did this, but they, as soon as they could, in the first day of the year that was eligible to do that, they outlawed the slave trade. Didn't outlaw slavery, but they outlawed bringing in slaves. Just curious that England and the United States, essentially the same year, outlawed the slave trade. But England and Portugal, they transported, I think, upwards of 50 million slaves across the planet, to South America, North America, South America.
Yeah.
And up 2.5 million of those people were landed in the United States and were into slavery, brought into slavery in the United States. So like you say, that the country had this thing going on in it. I mean, the New World, the colonies had this problem. There were people that saw it for what it was, terrible, and there were people that said, "Hey, look, that's how we make our living. Don't stop us."
Mm-hmm.
And so was America. So was it founded? There are provisions in the Constitution that, or rather, these aren't really my thoughts. I'm parroting something that I read. This guy was pointing out that there were provisions in the Constitution that didn't legitimize slavery. They didn't acknowledge slavery. They didn't legitimize it. Nowhere in the Constitution do they even talk about it. Now, they restrict it for the purpose of representation in Congress. They didn't want to give the southern states an advantage because, a good portion of their population were slaves.
Yeah. They
didn't want them an advantage, so they said, they used this 3/5, as a way to kind of say, okay, they recognize these people as humans, but they're only going to count 3/5 towards representation so that they could offset the influence of the southern states. And I think, yeah, prejudice exists everywhere. It exists now. It exists everywhere. It existed in this country. But was the United States founded as a racist nation? I don't, we're still, maybe you'll find some other things, or you'll tell me some things where point to that. But the Constitution itself that had in it the seeds that were needed to get rid of slavery, ultimately. I'll stop talking.
No, honestly, I really liked a lot of what you're saying because, at least in my cursory memory of the Constitution, you're right. It doesn't really mention race or like racial ideas very much. But at the same time, by doing that, they're not really addressing some of these pretty obvious problems that are taking place. Like you mentioned, like in 1808, they stopped the slave trade, and that was more of an external influence because it was other countries that were doing it. But after that, the United States, they started doing something called chattel slavery, where they're essentially raising another race of people almost as if they're farm animals, where they're taking these people and they're breeding them and selling their children off.
Sure. I mean, yeah, but you're right. I mean, I think that's part of slave ownership. See, in a way, that's the difference. See, my understanding is that the folks back in Africa that were selling slaves, their idea of slavery, I mean, I think maybe this has been.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot lost in translation over the years and cultures between.
Yes.
Like the 1600s and now.
But the story that I heard was, these guys weren't as bad as you think, because slaves in Africa were more often, you're a slave for a certain length of time, and then you become part of the family. And I think the quote Native Americans, the Indians in this country, they would take slaves or engage in battle with neighbors, take prisoners, and then the prisoners ultimately become part of the family. But in this country, like you say, slaves, they were property. Yes. So, but the Constitution is a federal document, mm-hmm. and there was a big effort to try to allow states' rights. There's a lot of these issues. This federal document delegated to the states. So prior to, and I just read this, they said that if you were a free black person, there were free black men, not women, but black men were allowed to vote in states where it was legal to vote, for them to vote. But there were at least 3, Virginia, I don't remember the other 2, but there were several colony states where black people were not allowed to vote. But black men were allowed to vote in some states. And the point of this is that the Constitution sets out the rules for the federal government, and then the states have, there are these individual laboratories that are working out, how democracy, representative democracy, how it's done. And so, say the Constitution founded the country, and then the states, they all have constitutions. Mm-hmm. I don't know where we go from there, but I'll stop talking.
No, that's fine. It's almost like you're saying that, like, when America was founded, when we first start having this Constitution, the people, like, you kind of can't help but notice that a good portion of the people are racist. Like, they are owning other people, right? They don't like black people. They don't think black people should vote. They don't think natives should be, like, there's a lot of racially charged ideas going around. But I guess what what one of your big points that you're making here is that the country itself, like if you're considering the country to be the group of rules and laws and regulations that like set the framework and the groundwork, that was at least on face attempting to not be racially motivated at all. That they were trying to overlook some of these obvious truths about racism and set the framework for getting past it in a legal way.
Well, they were trying to make a compromise.
Yeah.
There's 13 colonies, and there's a certain percentage of them, they're slaveholding colonies. And look, this whole experiment's not going to work unless we stick together. So
otherwise you're going to be setting the people who are opposed to this are going to be violently fighting the people who want it, and it'll, instead of being a union, it'll be a continent where everyone is fighting each other.
Yes, yeah, the states needed to be in a union, and they're not individual states like in Europe where you have these little countries. We call them little. Yeah, so
because the reality is, if the United States had never really banded together as one nation, probably they just would have gotten picked off by a bunch of other. You'd have like Georgia got conquered by the Dutch, and most of it got retaken by Britain. Some of it's France, some of it's like it wouldn't still be our own independent country these days.
I think that's
unless everyone was all on board, and even if they're not agreeing on everything, if like a common enemy came out, we would all band together to save America.
But I think that's a genius observation you make, Matt, that, had the necessity of being a union. Yeah, very well said. So, yeah, racism, see, I prefer the word prejudice. I mean, it's sort of it's a more general term.
Yeah, everyone, I think, would admit to being prejudiced. Maybe not everyone would admit, but everyone should admit to being prejudiced. Everyone is prejudiced. Nobody doesn't look at someone and then judge them before they know everything about them.
Anytime I meet somebody who's an other, like there, here I am. I'm from this high school. Some kid from another high school. Man, all right, that's a challenge. And the guy has a Letterman's jacket on. Another challenge. And man, anybody who's different, we got problems with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Boston, and so kind of taking away from like you said, moving away from the racism comment and moving to prejudice. I straight up don't like anyone I see wearing a Yankees hat. I don't. It doesn't really matter anything. They could be the nicest guy in the world. They could give half their paycheck to charities. They could be working at food banks. I really don't care at that point. I'm prejudiced against Yankees fans.
Really?
Yeah.
That's, I have that's something I'm immune to is that sort of thing, is the allegiance to a athletic team. But what is it that? But how do you get by that? I mean, that's your first inclination.
Yeah, and it's something that I know about myself too. So I always try and check myself with that, where I'm like, oh, it's just a baseball team. You don't have to get that into it. But like the way that you're saying, like that you feel almost immune to it because you're not affiliated with some baseball. You weren't raised with that kind of in your brain, in your mind. That's kind of how I feel a lot of the times about like issues of race, issues of gender identity, a lot of these things that other people have a hard time being mindful of, that they're a little bit harder to put those prejudices aside.
I graduated from high school in 73. The draft, 1973, not 1873. The draft ended in 72. I never went into the service. Now, a couple of people of in my class, they went into the Army, Navy, and I grew up in a small town in Washington State, very small community. I mean, relatively small community, and we had one black family in our community, and the one daughter was in my class, another daughter was in the class younger than me, and then the two boys, a year or so after that. Now, this gal, our class, we just loved that gal. Everybody liked her. She was just as sweet as you could be. She was not unpleasant, just as nice as could be, not especially athletic. In fact, singularly unathletic. But everybody loved her. And we never said when they covered certain topics in social studies and things, everybody was I never heard the N-word within my class. We never said the N-word around her. Never. Now there were people older, maybe they did. But anyway, so that's kind of my experience. And the point of telling this is that there was a couple guys my age, of course, were classmates. They go into the service, and in the service, when they leave for the service, their experience is with this very nice person, and they have no racial prejudices, at least nothing serious. And when they get into the service, their point of view changes, and they kind of, boy, I don't know. One of those guys today, he speaks hard in racial terms, and he kind of clumps people together, and he clumps people together. Now,
that's actually really interesting to me. I'm also, for those listening at home who don't know me, I am a veteran. I was in the service for many years, and I have a very opposite experience with that, where when you kind of band together, there is, at least recently, there's never been a ban on any races joining the military. So when you join, you could be in a unit with pretty much anyone. You could be in with people from India, people from Mexico, people from Africa. America is a huge mixing pot, and we've got all sorts of races. And when you join the military, all of that seems to go out the window. All of you are basically agreeing that you're going to die for each other if it comes down to that, So that's really interesting to me that even though they went into the service, they met some people and they were like, you know what? I'm over this whole race of people off of some interactions with a few people in the military. But I also don't know what happened with those people.
Well, the things I'm talking about happened in the 70s, and maybe it lasted till the 80s, maybe. Now, you were in the service. They tried to clear this up, and it looks like they have, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, I guess that is a big difference. I was in like 2010 is when I started my contract. It was a good 40 years past the 70s. And the 70s, we've had our fair share of civil unrest due to racial issues in the past couple of years. But it does not hold a candle to what was happening in the 60s and 70s as far as racial unrest.
Well, in the 60s, for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely in the 60s, early 60s, Martin Luther King Jr. And, those were turbulent times. And it was terrible that, there was lots of prejudice. There was racism. And again, worked hard against blacks. And I don't know quite when this happened, but let's say in the early 70s, they started something called affirmative action. Are you familiar with that term, affirmative action?
Yeah, I'm definitely familiar with that term. The idea that because this inequality has existed for so long, that the pendulum sort of needs to swing in the opposite direction, and we need to kind of intentionally include like people of color, people of other genders than male, that they need to have equity, that they should all be essentially equal.
In those days, we called it equality. I don't know. I mean, to me, equity and equality, to me, the word means the same thing, but I don't know why equity is used now today instead of equality. But yeah, you're right. Affirmative action is that. And some people, I've heard people say recently, that was a form of reparations. They were trying to correct a situation.
That essentially, like before that, there was not equality. And so now something needs to take place that will create a sense of equality where there wasn't one. And so something has to change in that situation.
And I think they were justifying it, saying, look, this is one aspect of it, is they're saying, look, these communities don't have an infrastructure of role models. They don't have, forgive me for focusing on black citizens, but okay, there aren't enough black doctors, not enough black school teachers, black professionals. I mean, so they in order to build up those communities and so they could have these role models. Well, now this pendulum has kind of swung a little back the other way, and highly successful minorities, namely Asians, are excluded from elite schools because of because they are Asian. Have you heard of that?
I've only heard a little bit about that, where like because certain, like, I guess universities or schools have too many people of Asian descent already enrolled, that they will reject certain people. I don't actually know like the validity on that personally.
Well, yeah. I mean, we're talking elite schools. Nobody cares about local community college.
Which is where that's generally my stomping ground, is the local community colleges. I've never been to an elite school in my life, so. Well, yeah, I walked through Harvard once.
You're way ahead of me.
It's nice. You should visit. But actually, wait, before we go on a little bit, this actually segues on pretty well into kind of the other half of our show. We covered, was America founded as a racist nation, or was it racist at the get-go? And we've talked a little bit of the time between the founding and now, but I think maybe the next part of our podcast should be about whether or not America still is a racist nation, or if it has successfully used this constitutional framework to heal our racism problem from 1600 before, or if it's still a problem that we're fighting to make better.
Sure. Yeah. I for the life of me, I'm an old guy, and the last 50 some years, we've seen affirmative action, and we see, all right, here in Washington State, there are, in my opinion, I would be on board with continuing affirmative action, but based on socioeconomic preferences, not on race preferences. If a person comes from a poor background, doesn't have opportunities, open up, cut them some slack. If the person has tons of money, they don't need a scholarship. Well, they don't need to have somebody else pay their tuition just because they're black.
Yeah, and I actually do agree with you on that point to a certain degree, because that takes the lens off of it kind of being about race. That regardless of what race you are, you could be struggling. Regardless of what gender you are, you could be struggling. Even though there is like this history of there being a lot of racial problems and gender problems and whatever kind of prejudice problems, but I kind of get where you're coming. Like, focusing on that isn't necessarily going to solve anything.
I agree. And
It gets
well,
people kind of talking more about race, you know, which is not necessarily a bad thing. We're talking about race right now.
well, yes. Now, in the last 20 some years, the word maybe longer, the diversity has been, emphasized, the need for diversity. And I'm all for diversity. A lot of the value that whatever diversity is, it isn't the color of your skin. The diversity is your social economic background, your experiences. And if you're now, maybe they were driven, maybe because you were a certain color, you had a harder time in life, and then you should qualify. I mean, that gives you a different experience. My point is that if you, let's say a big corporation, they say, yeah, now we're going to hire all minorities. But if all the minorities went to the most prestigious prep schools and then went
they're
to the,
still completely affluent. They're not from a community that has struggled. Like maybe their family has struggled, but they are not personally struggling. They just happen to be of the color that they need.
and see in the environment I was from, the people were trying to make our team or our company stronger, and we said, well, we need to do that by having diversity. And I'm all for that. But if you want to have diversity, which, like when you're trying to solve problems, the diversity of thought, the diversity of backgrounds, you don't get such a wide selection of diversity of thought and backgrounds if everybody comes from the upper social economic strata. So, okay, I got us sidetracked.
No, it's okay. I'm enjoying this conversation. It made me think of though the fact that there's a reason why these affirmative, and you said yourself that you're pro affirmative action to a certain degree, and it exists because people are there that make it have to exist. That there still are these people who are hiring purely based on racial. They're like, we only hire white people, and they might not say that out loud, but that's their personal opinion. That's the best person that they're not gonna go out of their way to look for people of color because, like, they almost use it as an excuse, you know. They kind of like twist the argument. Maybe unconsciously even.
Now in big corporations, you don't see that. I mean, they don't. I don't know if you can find a big corporation that's biased towards let's just hire white people. And it's not true in government. And I'm okay. I'm okay. We want diversity. I think that diversity is valuable, but I don't consider the color of someone's skin as the criteria for it, generally speaking.
No, I agree with you. The color of someone's skin is not any kind of like performance indicator. Like you can't just look at someone and be like, "Oh, that person would be good at doing this." That's not how people work. Everyone is a different person, and the color of their skin is an aspect of their physical appearance, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, you're right.
So in that way, like at face value, affirmative action doesn't make that much sense with none of the historical context about it.
No, you got a point, and I'm in a way I'm okay with affirmative action based on socioeconomic basis, but
which takes into that kind of historical aspect, is if a community has historically been kind of given the raw end of the deal and they've been kind of left out to dry. By all means, maybe the government needs to step in and be like, no, you have to stop ignoring this community. You have to stop.
I'll buy that. Yeah. I agree. I'm buying that.
But it's really hard to kind of make that thing work, like in a perfect way.
Well,
where everyone's happy. You know,
well,
that's a lot of the problems with this country is that it is a democracy. So the solutions have to make everyone happy,
well,
and they
I'm gonna
rarely do.
agree with you. We have a representative democracy. And you have to, so then theoretically, the people that represent us in government,
Mm-hmm.
they're making quote tough decisions. Theoretically, I have a low opinion of people in political office, but they're making these tough decisions, and they can't make everybody happy, and that's where I was going with that.
Yeah. So they have to do whatever it seems to be the most fair.
Okay, all right.
And that makes sure that things still work. Like if something seems fair but it breaks the way the country works and throws everyone into like a hard time, that's not doing their job very well either.
Well, I think that is a fantastic observation. But I think, that's a great thought. Your heart is in the right place, and you're thinking right about this. Can help me understand what, they talk about white privilege. They talk about white fragility. They talked about, the intrinsic racism. Now, yes, help me understand any of those. I don't see those.
So I feel like I understand all of those things fairly well. I'm Italian American, but I am white, and I present very white, and because of that, I don't always face a lot of the same problems that people who don't present white face. Where,
tell me. Well, give me an example of a problem.
For instance, I am a early educator, and part of my job sometimes is that I get to be a babysitter, which means that people trust me alone in their home with their children. And I think that I would have a much harder time landing babysitting jobs if I was of a race that someone didn't find comfortable being around, if they were a racist person. So if, like, say someone does not like black people because they think they're dangerous, they're a lot less likely to hire a black person to be their babysitter. And, like, various other situations like that, where it can be even more, like, say a police officer pulls someone over and they see a nice friendly white person, they go, oh, okay, they're just, all white people are friendly, so this person's probably a lot like me. And then they see someone who's not their race. They see someone who's maybe from an African-American community, and their thoughts don't go to the same place. They're going to treat that person a lot more differently.
Oh, I agree. Those,
like there are a handful of situations where people will make decisions based on race without even thinking about it.
You mentioned the police. You mentioned the police officer, the police situation.
Yeah.
And this is an anecdotal reference. Or let's say there are a couple of black guys are walking along the street, and it's dark. It's not made. It's dark. The situation is a little iffy, and then they hear some people behind them, and they look behind them, and they see it's a couple of white guys, and then they say, oh boy, okay, no problem.
I mean, that's kind of an example of white privilege, though. Like, those two white guys behind those guys could have been up to no good themselves. But because
true.
you are white, there's this kind of, this implied harmlessness, which is really not the case. Like, white people commit crimes all the time. There's a lot of crazy white people out there.
Well, yeah. Look, there's a disproportionate number of black people are in prison.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
A disproportionate number of black people commit crime.
Now, see, that's where I don't necessarily agree. A disproportionate amount of black people get caught and convicted of committing crimes. But I don't necessarily think that there's more black people committing. Like, I know a lot of white people who commit crimes, and they've never seen a day in a jail cell.
Part of me wants to say, Matt, you're part of you're aiding and abetting criminals. It sounds like you work that out. Okay, it's a family. I don't know. It's family situation. I don't know. You work it out. But I think your point of view is because Lando kind of mentioned it, is that at least his point of view was that he was somewhat of a supporter for defunding the police. Now, and so I think, and is that also your point of view as well? That
I can't speak for every community's police, but as somebody who lived on Capitol Hill over the past 2 years, I would be all for cutting the Capitol Hill police's budget and reallocating that to a system that works a little bit better than what they were doing.
Yeah.
Either as like some sort of punishment for the specific I've been known to say the knee-jerk phrase, all cops are bastards, in a moment of anger when I've seen some police abuses. But I don't truly believe that all cops are bastards. But what I do believe is that the cops in the Capitol Hill precinct are bastards. And they're doing their job poorly. And there needs to be more oversight. And probably give them less money. They've been getting a lot of money and using it, I guess, on munitions for protesters, on sweeps of the park to, like, I don't agree with what my personal police department was doing. So I don't think they should be having as much funding as they have. And I'd prefer that to go to, like, community organizers, like people to go out and give outreach to the homeless. Like, there's so many other beneficial programs than the police. And I don't think that they should lose all of their... Like, I think the police are doing a job when they're doing their job right, that there's a need for police in our society. But just the way that they're currently being utilized isn't working for everyone.
Okay, I mean, I personally see... my point of view is that almost all policemen have a personality disorder. They tend to be bullies, but you need them. I mean, I'm not a fan. I'll be respectful, but, you know, being a policeman is a very extreme point of view. Police typically only have other police, law enforcement people as friends.
Yeah.
They might say the reason for that is because, well, their non-police friends are asking for favors, and they can't do that. But another reason might be that, gee, you know, it's easier to get along with people that are just like you. But I'm not a fan of the cops, but I see the need for them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is, you know, we got going down this road because I said there was disproportionate number of black people committing crime, and you corrected me, or you corrected me by saying that it's just a disproportionate number of black people that get arrested, and they're leaving the white people alone, the white criminals alone. And I don't know how I got it going off on this direction about a disproportionate number of black people are committing crime, and you're saying no, a disproportionate number of black people are arrested for crime and prosecuted for crime.
At the end of the day, we could probably talk about that in circles until we're blue in the face, but there's not really an easy way to prove either one of us right or wrong in this scenario. Like, you can't...
Well, no, you're right. I agree. Well, how do we prove that? Now, that's the question we need to ask. And maybe we'll figure out a way to prove it. But so there's white privilege is... Well, one aspect of white privilege is there's this sort of, narrative that whites are safe, so to speak. Asians get a pass too, for the most part. They're safe, aren't they?
Yeah, people use the phrase model minority a lot about the Asian communities. Is that they are technically a minority. They are technically a different race. Like, you can see that visually, but they still somewhat benefit from like this privilege in our culture, that people still see them as like safe, employable, various other positive phrases.
My thinking about all of this stuff is that these narratives are being created and presented as a way to, and boy, we can stop me from going in this direction as soon as I propose it. But see, I think that a lot of this discussion, critical race theory specifically, critical race theory is Marxist theory repackaged using, instead of using wealth and class as the reason to go overturn, have a revolution. They're using race as the reason for revolution. That's my point of view about all this, and history is being rewritten. Like they want to say, hey, United States founded on racism. Well, yeah, there's been racism in the past, but is it really founded on it? Anyway, Matt, what do you say to that?
To that, I guess I would question which people in power, I guess, are Marxists that are making these decisions to have like a racial Marxist revolution. Because from what I've understood in paying attention to news and my politicians, is most politicians are pretty anti anything left of center, let alone Marxism is a pretty extreme viewpoint. It's like the overthrow of all of industry by a working class revolution to recontrol it amongst themselves, which doesn't really line up with a lot of the race theory stuff. Like, I don't really see how it kind of pairs up there. And if anything, you kind of were giving a more Marxist solution to affirmative action, where you said, no, it shouldn't even be based on race at all. It should actually be based off of who has less money, and then we should give them more equity. Like, if anything, that's more Marxist than any critical race theory stuff I've heard.
No, well, but Marxism, there, like every lie has a kernel of truth in it, and then every crazy idea has some good stuff in it. And Marx, like when he was writing, I don't know, 1820s, 1840s, what time frame was he alive in?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think his ideas started getting popular post-Civil War, so like around like the 1860s, 1870s, but like right around in the 1800s.
So now back then, this guy was right. He saw this tremendous injustice. They saw this tremendous injustice. The workers weren't getting nothing, and then you had these rich capitalists. This guy was right. Now, do you destroy the whole world? I'm not saying he was right about that. Overturning things.
You're like saying he saw the problem.
Yes.
But you don't think he gave like any form of reasonable solution to the problem.
Well, to be honest, I honestly don't know. Okay. I guess he was proposing communism. Am I wrong? He was proposing communism.
Yeah. He's definitely, I think he coined the phrase communism. There's a specter of communism.
Yeah.
Haunting Europe in the Communist Manifesto. He wrote the Communist Manifesto. He definitely was proposing communism. Yeah.
Yeah, good job. So he's our first communist. So, now, I don't think communism. Well, if if communism really kind of worked, somebody would have got it close to right by now. Maybe. What do you think? Is there
Well, a lot of the communist countries, once they got started up, were destroyed by capitalist countries who didn't want that to happen, right? Like, I don't think very many communist countries have collapsed on themselves without any conflict from
well,
the West.
in a way, I mean, I think you're connecting dots, but the narrative you associated with it, I wouldn't use that narrative. Like the Soviet Union was this collection of, Russia and something or other, and then there's all these little satellite countries,
right?
That the Russians, Czechoslovakia and others, East Germany. Well, they didn't tell it over.
Yeah, it was a decent portion of the world at that point, at their height.
And it wasn't like the people of Poland or Czechoslovakia or these other places, they didn't vote the Russians in. They got taken over.
Yeah.
Okay. So, maybe that's the way communism needs to happen. But the United States has been, there's this tension between the United States and the Soviets, or Russians now, and now it's United States and China. We're at war with China now, and we're at war. We're not in a kinetic exchange, and we're not sending bullets to them, but we're at war.
But we're like adversaries, like actively adversarial.
Adversary, but we're at war with our economies. We're at war with people are hacking the heck out of us, and I sure hope the American government has a first-class team of hackers.
Oh, amen. Me too.
Oh my goodness! But so the point is that you were saying that these communist nations didn't get a chance to thrive because those blankety-blank capitalists came in and crapped on them. But that's not necessary. I mean, I don't know. Give me an example of that. Give me an example of a communist country that was, I don't know, maybe this is impossible, that wasn't adversarial with the United States. Maybe that's...
Yeah, I think it's like, at least at the time that communism becomes an idea, the people in charge in the United States are probably like, this is the opposite of what we want to have happen. We are trying to be capitalist. We're trying to be almost too capitalist. And so I feel like the United States specifically almost has no option but to be incredibly anti-communist.
Well, no, but look at China.
I wouldn't consider China a really, really great example of communism in action, but they are self-proclaimed communists.
All right, and I don't understand. I have no understanding of how their economy works.
Yeah, I'm not too certain either. Honestly, it's a big country.
It's not communism like Karl Marx talked about, and the reason I would mention Marx was because, in a way, a lot of what Marx wanted happened when labor laws were instituted and unions came into play, and now people earn living. Look at the huge middle class that we have. People work a day. People have comfortable lives. And I think in reality, if Marx was alive today, would he look at the United States and say, "Man, we got to change this place"?
I think probably, yeah. I think a lot of the same problems he was seeing in Germany at the time, I think that's where he was writing about, was Germany.
Yeah.
honestly, we're not that far removed from a lot of those things still. Is that like
I disagree.
like a handful of people control like 90% of the wealth?
Well, now, yes. Now, this happens all the time in everything that we see and do. It's called Pareto. Pareto predicted it's the 80-20 rule, or even something more than that. But look, in sports, you can count on one. On two hands you can count the absolute best athletes in a given sport. On a team, there's one or two players that they're way out there in performance, and then the others are they're not. They're definitely in a supporting role, and this happens in every endeavor, and it happens in economics and finances, and the people that are at the top. I mean, at the very, very top, the very top people kind of shift. It's a shifting club. We can't eliminate. They haven't been able to figure out a way to. How do you have to kill the entire system if you want to get rid of the 1% or the 0.5% of the country that owns most of the wealth.
Especially like in a system that is based on capital, the people with the most capital tend to have the most power. So it's really difficult to make them give that up willingly. Like they wouldn't do that more than likely.
No.
So it's easier for them to kind of just get people to ignore it and to talk about other stuff. Get mad at your neighbor because he's black. Get mad at your neighbor because he's white. Get mad, like bring up all of these differences that get in the way of realizing, like, probably they don't need that much money. That's like their goal is to make sure that people aren't too upset about the fact that they own 90% of everything. Because I mean, at the end of the day, is Jeff Bezos like the peak American? Like he's just the smartest guy, and so he deserves to have all that money?
Well,
no.
I mean, there's success. I mean, success in business has a lot to do with timing and just dumb luck. It's dumb luck and timing, and these guys, they're doing something. Now, do they deserve what they have? Well,
I mean, they're definitely providing a service, but so is everyone. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't sit right with me as an American that so many people are struggling and having such a hard time when there's a few people who could pretty much never struggle. Like, there's no possible way that they could be having a hard time financially ever again in their entire life, or any of their kids, or any of their kids' kids, or any of their kids' kids, And it just kind of sucks. It sucks that there's people who are dying because they don't have health care, and they're telling us that we can't afford health care, but then we have people who could afford anything.
And look, I'm in a way, this is slightly disingenuous, if I'm using the word correctly. What I'm about to say is I am willing, like I'm right of center, maybe I'm hardcore right wing, but I'm all for let's say if you could show it has to be viable, it has to be sustainable. But if we could have universal health care, okay, let's do it. If we can show that it's viable and sustainable, if there was some way, I mean, and to my way of thinking, you can't, it'll.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump, but he had a good quote about healthcare, which I thought was kind of funny at the time, but he's right, is who knew healthcare could be so complicated? It's the system that we've got in place it's kind of like slapped together And it does work, but I feel like a lot of people are afraid of breaking it because if you end up getting rid of the healthcare system, even the shitty one that we have, a lot of people are going to die. A lot of people are going to get sick and not be able to get taken care of. It's a really important system.
One aspect, or one, in my opinion, one problem with the healthcare system is that, well, I'll avoid using trigger words, but one aspect of it is that, see, well, the insurance companies are involved, and I can't shop for my health care. When I go in to get something done, I don't know how much it costs. You know, the insurance people are covering it. So I don't even have.
That's like the worst part about it, is that you don't find out how much the thing you need costs until after they do it.
Yeah.
I hate that.
Then, when you go in, they say, you know, you show them, you know, look, I've got great insurance. Fine. Sign this document that says anything we do, you're going to pay for. But I only want you. The insurance people are already going to pay for things that are medically justified.
Mm-hmm.
But you sign a document that says anything they do, you're going to pay for. Well, I'm tempted. I don't know if it makes any sense now I'm on Medicare. I'm tempted to write in and say, I'll pay for anything that's medically justified.
I wonder what they'd say, honestly.
They'd throw me out. Probably. They wouldn't treat me.
Oh, God.
Yeah, the care industry, it's got problems. It is complicated. I don't understand why it's complicated. But if we could come up with a way, I'm all for it.
I guess we should probably circle back around to whether or not America is or is not still a racist country, and then probably get some finishing remarks and maybe wrap it up from there.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Matt. I apologize.
No, don't apologize. I'm having a great time, Tomàs. This has been really fun for me. And anytime you want to be back on the show, hit us up and we'll come up with another topic. I'm really enjoying talking to you.
Well, you're Orlando, and you are very intelligent young man, and I wish you the best of success.
Get to know us, and you'll change your tune there.
You have a lot of courage, and I admire that. Now, is America, was it founded as a racist nation? I don't see a lot of evidence for that. Was there lots of racism? Yeah, because there's tons. Because America's full of people, and our past. It's a checkered past. It's this quilt work, patch quilt of things that have happened, and that's our history. And some of it sucks. We did terrible. I mean, as a nation, we did some bad things. I think things are, before critical race theory was promulgated in the last couple of years, you know, I was thinking things were looking good. We're on the right path. We're going in the right direction. What is
it exactly about critical race theory that you think is making things go in the wrong direction? Admittedly, I don't know much about critical race theory, so I'm willing to hear pretty much anything you have to say about it, and I'll do my own research later. But I want to hear your opinion on this one.
My understanding. I retired from my employer, and I didn't get any of that good training after I retired. But my understanding of things is now I think the advocates for critical race theory are saying, look, there's been racism in the past, and it was the whites that subjugated everybody else. So the answer now is, well, not just shame and rub the white folks' noses into this thing, but to punish the whites. And that's the spin that that's my understanding of the objective of critical race theory is they're not trying to heal. They're trying to it's divisive. They're trying to call attention to problems that maybe don't even exist, perhaps, but they're calling attention to problems. It's divisive rather than a healing time. The 60s, lots of turmoil. Blacks were tremendously courageous. Martin Luther King Jr. and others, they got the country to turn around. Then we went through 50 years of affirmative action, a type of reparations. And, we're trying to make the world better. And now we're transitioning into critical race theory, and they're saying, hey, the whites have to be punished.
Do you really think that's what critical race theory is about, though? Because from what I've heard, and we're probably getting our stuff from different news sources, more than likely, and admittedly, neither of us have been in a critical race theory class. Neither of us really know what it's about. But
oh yeah,
but isn't it possible that the people who are making you think that it's about shaming and guilting white people are being just as divisive by making that the narrative about it, instead of saying like, oh, this is probably here to have a conversation about, like we definitely do have racial problems in this country, and it doesn't help them unless you try to understand them and talk about them. And if it really is, they're just going in there and saying, like, white people are really bad. They did all these really bad things. It's time to shame them publicly. Everyone get on board. Like, that does sound shitty. I don't think that that's what should be happening, but I'm just not fully convinced that is what is happening.
You're right that I'm not informed on the topic, but I don't know if you've noticed, there was recently there was a man, I can't, what was his name? He had a different color skin than me, and he became president. Darn. And then just recently,
Donald Trump?
Yeah, he's orange.
He had a real different color skin there.
You got a point. Barack Obama?
Yeah, Barack Obama.
Twice in this country. What other country has had a similar situation where a black person has France had a black prime minister? How about Israel? How about Germany?
Bolivia has a kind of similar story where originally it was all white people who had been in charge in Bolivia for years and years and years, and then recently they had like their first native who was in charge of things. But I'm sure there's plenty of people that are other than the original race that moved there. But also, like, America isn't a white country. So it makes sense that we wouldn't have only white presidents, but we've only had one who wasn't.
How many Catholic presidents have we had?
Just JFK, right? Oh, and Biden. And Biden now.
Joe Biden is nominally
aren't we all? No, we aren't. There's plenty of people who are very, very staunch Catholics.
The reality is unfortunately, yes, I'm not as Catholic as I should be. But yeah, so there's Kamala Harris. She's a person of color. Yes.
That is true. Yes, she is.
Identifies as a black person. She's half black. I think she's also Indian.
Yeah, I believe her family's from India.
But again, it's not. She didn't get raised in the ghettos of Chicago. She had a much better life than that. Well, Barack Obama had more of a lower middle class life in a way, I think. He wasn't wealthy. Nonetheless, are we a racist nation? Look, I did not vote for Barack Obama, but I would have voted for Condoleezza Rice. She wasn't running, but I kind of had I get the feeling she's kind of conservative. Well, I need more evidence that we're a racist nation. We're a nation of people that have prejudices. But the thing is, I don't think we have intrinsic racism. Our government, I believe our laws themselves are race neutral. I think you would say that the implementation of the law is not race neutral.
Yeah, that the people who are executing the law fall among all these people in the country who have prejudices, that people aren't, there's no one who's without prejudice. So sometimes things get worked out a different way.
Well, see that, and I don't blame the cops individually for the crap, most of the crap that goes on. It's they're told to do, they're the hands and feet of policymakers, and then it's the people I really hate are the prosecutors. They're the people that decide who gets, who's going to be prosecuted. They're the people that say, hey, these minorities, they're going to go to jail.
Yeah, once they actually make it into the justice system, and you've got these really entrenched positions with the judges and prosecutors,
Yeah,
and people who show up every single day and are just putting people in jail all day or letting people go all day. Either way.
Yeah, they swing both directions.
Yeah, they make the choice. That is their job, is to make the choice of who goes to jail, who gets to not go to jail.
Well, Matt, I have taken up a lot of your time and Orlando's time. The way I see this is that, you're not going to hurt my feelings if you, after this discussion, you say, this one isn't going to fly. And if, you won't be able to make a podcast out of it because of me.
I think we're going to put this one on, and we'll clip out all that terrible shit you said earlier, but really spin it to make my point for me. No, I'm just kidding.
Look, I'm okay with, I think it would be just fine if you, as part of your podcast, is you use this, quote, as stimulation, and then you do some research and you say, no, this guy's wrong because of this. And this is what I found. And I think that would be an interesting commentary for your program, would be to, kind of a after show review or after.
Yeah, go in and really pick it apart, kind of.
Yeah. And I think that's fine. I wouldn't think it's a, I think you ought to do that.
I think that you're almost kind of misjudging what we're trying to be doing here on this podcast, is that we're not trying to find people we disagree with and win an argument with them. We're trying to kind of have a conversation and see where it is that we find common ground. Because I'm an American, I love this country. You're an American, you love this country. Lando's an American, he likes this country. And we can't do it by ourselves. The left can't do it by themselves. The right can't do it by themselves. The center can't do it by themselves. Just like we were saying earlier, the 13 colonies, neither one of them could do it by themselves. So we have to find this common ground, and we have to try and figure out how we can find solutions to these problems, or even talk about if they are problems. Not everyone agrees that these things are problems, but find the common ground between the two sides, meet in the aisle. We said it's the name of the podcast. Meet in the aisle and band together, try and figure out how we can help make these changes. And I hope you go home and think about some of the stuff that we said and look into it and be like, those guys were full of shit. Or, I really did agree with some of these points. Maybe I should reevaluate what I was thinking. And I'm hoping that by the end of the time that me and Lando spend getting more guests like you, more people who are willing to sit down and talk to us and not just parrot back things they've said, but really think about things that we'll be able to kind of heal and move forward as a country together, instead of constantly being on one side of the aisle, building up your enemy as this terrible shitbag, and then just thinking that you're right about everything. That doesn't help anything.
You're right. You're absolutely correct. And, when my brother, he's 9 years older than I am, he gets his news from a certain, news sources that are opposite to mine. And I feel so bad that I can't have a conversation with him because, I don't know, this family thing, it's hard to have a conversation. It's hard for me to be fair and listen. And that was part of the challenge I gave myself, was to say, look, be nice to Orlando and Matt.
Well, thank you. I do think you were being very nice to us, and I really appreciate having this conversation. This has been a great first podcast, in my opinion.
You guys are going to be very successful. I agree that conversation's needed, and I encourage you on your path.
So,
oh yeah, I've talked too much. I apologize.
Us too. But thank you very much, and we hope to hear from you again. We'll possibly hit you up to have a second podcast sometime in the future.
Well, send me a link to your program as it goes. Put me on your list.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm subscribing.
Like and subscribe.
That's right.
Awesome. Well,
yeah, thanks for being on Meeting in the Aisle and being our very first guest.
It was an honor. You gentlemen are fantastic.
You too, sir. Have a great night. And to you listening at home, have a great night as well.